Right now, high above the Middle East, the United States military is launching a $4 million piece of bleeding-edge aerospace engineering into the sky. And its sole purpose is to destroy a slow-moving, propeller-driven flying lawnmower that basically costs less than a used Honda Civic.
Yeah, and they're doing this hundreds of times a day.
Hundreds.
It's the brutal, unforgiving math of modern combat, and right now it's a mathematical equation that the West is essentially losing.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. It is the evening of Thursday, March 12, 2026.
Which means we're exactly 12 days into this.
Right, 12 days since this whole regional crisis exploded on February 28. And man, the landscape is just shifting at a dizzying pace.
It really is.
So to make sense of all this for you, we've pulled together a massive stack of fresh sources from the last 48 hours. We're talking live tracking data, YouTube broadcasts from top geopolitical analysts, and raw, unfiltered interviews with military strategists.
Yeah, because our mission today isn't just to give you a timeline recap.
Exactly. We want to look at the underlying mechanisms, forecast the most likely scenarios for the coming weeks, and really trace how a drone strike 7,000 miles away is going to directly impact you.
Your grocery bill, your technology, your daily life in the Western world.
Because the distance between a battlefield in the Persian Gulf and your local economy has, frankly, never been shorter.
No, it hasn't. We're watching a localized kinetic war trigger a massive global supply-side shock.
And real quick, before we jump into the timeline, I want to be super clear about our sources.
Oh, right, the impartiality part.
Yeah, a lot of the expert analysis we reviewed is highly politically charged. Some of it leans heavily to the left, some leans way to the right.
Depending on the analyst.
Exactly. We are completely impartial here. We aren't taking sides. We aren't endorsing any specific political viewpoint.
We're just the messengers.
Right, just laying out the unfiltered facts and extra projections we found so you can stay well informed. So, with that out of the way, let's start with the biggest news of the day. The catalyst that just hit the wires.
The new Supreme Leader.
Yes, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated Ali Khamenei, was elected. And if Western planners were sitting around hoping the recent strikes would, install a moderate leadership or force Tehran to the negotiating table?
Well, today's broadcast totally shattered that illusion.
Ugly.
The analysts we reviewed are really highlighting a critical distinction here between the new Supreme Leader and his predecessors.
He's not just a cleric, right?
Exactly. Mojtaba Khamenei has these deep foundational roots in the military and the intelligence apparatus, plus actual combat experience from his youth.
Which completely explains the tone of his very first public directive today. I mean, he didn't issue some vague diplomatic warning.
No, it's very rigid.
A three-point operational framework. Vow to avenge the martyrs, maintain a total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and demand that every neighboring Gulf country evict American military bases immediately.
And that third point, that's the anchor of their entire strategy.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because listening to this, it sounds to me like a heavyweight boxer swinging wildly at a swarm of bees.
That's actually a great analogy.
Right. Like the boxer is incredibly powerful, but the swings are exhausting and expensive, while the bees are just cheap and endless.
That is the perfect way to describe the cost-exchange ratio in asymmetric warfare right now, because the facts from our sources are stark. The United States is currently spending nearly $1 billion a day.
A day?
A day, just to sustain this conflict.
Let's break that billion-dollar figure down.
Yeah.
Because, $1 billion sounds abstract until you look at the actual hardware.
Right.
Israel and the U.S. are relying on these incredibly complex interceptor networks. Systems like the Patriot missile batteries and THAAD.
The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense.
Yeah. And these systems require advanced radar arrays, solid rocket fuel, extreme precision engineering. A single THAAD interceptor costs millions.
Billions of dollars.
But they're firing these multi-million-dollar assets to shoot down Iranian Shahed-style drones that cost, maybe $30,000 to make?
If that. It's essentially slapping a GPS chip onto a fiberglass frame with a cheap engine.
Wow.
The financial asymmetry is staggering, yeah. But the more terrifying metric the analysts point out is the supply chain reality.
How so?
Well, in just the first few days of this conflict, the coalition fired over 800 Patriot missiles just to keep the airspace clear.
800?
Yeah, and 800 interceptors represents roughly 30% of the entire annual global production rate of Patriot missiles.
You're kidding. 30% of a year's supply gone in less than a week.
Gone. And you can't simply spin up a factory to replace them overnight. The defense supply chain relies on these highly specialized components that take years to source and assemble.
So we aren't just burning cash, we are burning time.
Exactly. Analysts uniformly agree this is a textbook war of attrition. Iran's strategy isn't to outgun the U.S. Navy in a direct firefight.
It's just to empty their magazines.
Precisely. To overwhelm the depth of the defense shields. The U.S. is already pulling reserve Patriot batteries from South Korea just to plug the gaps in the Middle East.
Wow.
But in a war of attrition, the rule is absolute. Whoever runs out of ammunition first loses.
Okay, so this smoothly transitions to my next question. If the U.S. and Israel are bleeding their air defense stockpiles dry, what happens to the neighboring countries hosting those American bases?
They get completely exposed.
Because we're talking about incredibly wealthy nations, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait.
Right, and they're suddenly finding themselves on the front lines. Iran is actively fulfilling its promise to target those host nations.
But they aren't just hitting military bunkers, are they?
No, not at all. The sources detail unprecedented strikes on civilian and economic infrastructure across the Gulf.
And looking at the target list, the focus on desalination plants is just alarming. For you listening, if you aren't familiar, nations in the Arabian Peninsula rely on reverse osmosis desalination to turn seawater into drinking water.
It's a highly energy-intensive, fragile process.
Right, so if you knock out a major desalination plant, or even just the power grid feeding it, a massive desert metropolis like Dubai or Doha literally runs out of water in a matter of days.
It's the absolute Achilles heel of the region. And add to that the strikes on transit and digital hubs. Dubai International Airport had to suspend operations.
Which is a huge global hub.
Massive. And the disruption even hit Amazon AWS data centers in the UAE. So these Gulf nations are rapidly waking up to the reality that their economic miracles are entirely vulnerable.
Wait, I want to push back on the military positioning here for a second.
Sure.
The United States has carrier strike groups deployed to the region, specifically to protect these allies.
Right.
I mean, they are the bodyguard. If we have billions of dollars of naval supremacy sitting right there, why are the Gulf states taking so much damage? Isn't the bodyguard supposed to take the bullet?
You'd think so, but the analysts point out that the U.S. security umbrella essentially has holes in it. Geography holes. The U.S. Navy is a blue water navy. It's built for deep ocean combat, where carriers have hundreds of miles to maneuver and use radar.
Right.
But the Strait of Hormuz is the exact opposite of the open ocean. It's a maritime choke point. At its narrowest, it's barely 30 kilometers wide.
That is incredibly narrow for a warship.
It leaves absolutely no room for a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier to establish a defensive screen. It's near-shore warfare. Plus, Iran has heavily mined those waters and lined the coastlines with hidden anti-ship cruise missiles.
So if the U.S. pushes ships in there, they're just sitting ducks.
Massive, vulnerable targets, so the U.S. can't easily shut it down at the source.
Which totally explains why European nations are getting dragged into this mess.
Wow.
The live tracking data shows the UK and France are providing critical naval and air base support.
Yeah, the UK is using its RAF Akrotiri base in Cyprus to launch interception sorties.
Which is a wild diplomatic pivot, considering our sources noted President Trump was just recently mocking UK Prime Minister Starmer, and now Washington is heavily relying on British bases.
Politics changes fast in a crisis. And the entanglement is spreading. Turkey actually had to shoot down an Iranian missile that entered its airspace.
Right, and Azerbaijan just thwarted a terror plot.
The conflict is acting like a centrifuge, just pulling everyone in. Well, almost everyone.
Yeah, the analysts are pointing out the glaring exceptions here. Russia and China.
They're essentially sitting back with their arms crossed.
From their viewpoint, this is perfect. They get to watch the West exhaust its interceptors, drain its treasuries, and strain alliances.
All without firing a single shot.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? What is the actual end game here for the leaders involved?
Well, reviewing the military forecasts, the problem is that the end games are completely conflicting.
Let's start with the U.S.
Right. President Trump is publicly demanding unconditional surrender. He wants to dictate the next Iranian leader. The analysis suggests this is viewed as a way to secure global hegemony and, crucially, to potentially starve China of its Middle Eastern oil supply.
Okay, and what about Israel?
According to the military strategists, Prime Minister Netanyahu's objective is to permanently eliminate Iran as a threat.
Right.
Analysts point to this greater Israel concept, which requires neutralizing all regional opposition, like Hezbollah.
Which we're already seeing in Lebanon. Israel has displaced 700,000 people there and launched ground incursions.
Exactly. And then you have Iran's endgame.
Which is simple.
Very simple. survival,
Right.
and forcing the complete eviction of U.S. forces from their region.
Just hold out until the enemy gets tired.
Right. But if the U.S. and Israel want regime change, there's a nightmare forecast that the military analysts all agree on.
Which is?
A ground invasion of Iran to force that regime change is a logistical impossibility.
Because of the size. I mean, geographically, Iran is larger than France, Germany, Spain, and the UK combined.
Combined, you cannot just roll an occupying force into Tehran.
So if a ground invasion is impossible, and the US and Israel are running out of interceptor missiles for an air war, what is the plan B?
And this is where the analysis gets chilling. The experts solemnly explain that the worst-case scenario, the fallback, if conventional defeat looms, is nuclear.
Oh, wow.
For Israel, analysts often refer to this as the Samson Protocol or the Samson option.
Like the biblical figure who brought the temple down on his enemies and himself.
Exactly. If they face an existential threat, they might resort to nuclear weapons to ensure their attackers go down with them.
Which brings the entire region, honestly, the whole world, into completely unknown apocalyptic territory.
It does.
Okay, so that is terrifying. But here's where it gets really interesting for you listening at home. I want to pivot from these nuclear hypotheticals to the guaranteed immediate reality that is going to hit your wallet today.
Yes, the economic shockwave.
Let's talk about the soft closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. Economically, that 30-kilometer gap usually handles 20% of the world's oil. But because of the mines and the missiles, commercial insurers refuse to underwrite ships going through there.
So it's effectively closed. And the numbers are insane. Oil prices have blasted past $100 a barrel, with spikes hitting $119.
And European gas prices are worse. The TTF benchmark has literally doubled to $61 per megawatt hour.
But how does this affect things other than filling up your car or heating your house? Because the sources detailed cascading supply chain failures that blew my mind.
Yeah, take the global food supply. The Gulf provides roughly half of the world's fertilizer.
And look at the calendar. It's mid-March right now. We are standing right at the start of the Northern Hemisphere's spring planting season.
Exactly. If farmers can't get fertilizer, or if the price quadruples, crop yields plummet. By autumn, we're looking at severe global food shortages.
And massive inflation at the grocery store.
Oh, absolutely. But there's another export that halts completely sulfur.
This one is crazy.
It really is. The Gulf is a massive exporter of sulfur, which is required to make highly pure sulfuric acid.
Which you need for microchips.
Right. It washes and etches the silicon wafers. No sulfur means no pure acid, which means semiconductor foundries just grind to a halt.
No new chips for cars, smartphones, medical equipment.
The whole tech supply chain seizes up, so analysts are forecasting massive global inflation. And for Europe, actual deindustrialization because factories simply can't afford the energy to stay open.
But the contrast with China here is stark.
Very. They quietly stockpiled 1.4 billion barrels of oil before this conflict even began.
1.4 billion barrels. They saw this coming.
They built a bunker for their economy so they can weather the storm while the West suffers.
Unbelievable. So, summarizing all this, we are looking at an unwinnable war of attrition, terrifying strategic endgames with a nuclear shadow, and an economic shockwave reshaping daily life in the West.
It is grim. But our sources point out one final, fascinating paradox to leave you with.
What's that?
The West's ultimate goal was to secure control over the Middle East. But the sheer devastation of this war and the realization that the U.S. can't fully protect its allies from asymmetric warfare might actually force historical rivals like Iran, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia to reconcile.
Just out of pure self-preservation.
Exactly, to form a unified bloc. So, could the very war designed to cement Western influence be the exact catalyst that ends Western colonialism in the Middle East forever?
Wow. That is definitely something for you to mull over as you watch the headlines and the prices change in the coming weeks. Keep questioning those headlines, look for the mechanisms behind the facts, and remember how connected we all really are. Take care.
So, it's Thursday evening, March 12th, 2026. We're looking at a conflict that exploded onto the scene just over 2 weeks ago, and it's already sending these massive shockwaves across the entire globe. It's threatening to unravel the world as we know it. And look, that's not just some analyst talking from a studio. That is a direct quote, a stark warning from Qatar's energy minister just last week. This is a key player, right at the heart of the world's energy supply, and he's laying out the stakes in the clearest, most brutal terms possible. Okay, so let's really break this down. How in the world did we get here? Because, to have any clue where we're headed, we absolutely have to understand how we got here and just how incredibly fast it all fell apart. This whole thing wasn't some slow burn, months of escalating tensions. No, the fuse was lit by a single dramatic event that basically pushed the entire region, and maybe the world, right over the edge. I mean, the speed of this is just staggering. Think about it. It all kicked off with one phone call on February 23rd. Netanyahu calls President Trump, says he has a golden piece of intel, Iran's entire leadership all gathered in one place. By the 27th, so just a few days later, U.S. intelligence apparently confirms it. And then, bam, the very next day, a coordinated strike hits Tehran. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and all his top advisors, gone. But here's the thing. What they thought would happen after that strike, and what actually happened, well, they couldn't have been more different. You see, the thinking in Washington and Tel Aviv was that this kind of decapitation strike would make the whole Iranian state just fracture and fall apart. But that's not what we saw. Not at all. Instead, analysts say the regime immediately pulled together, totally unified in their defiance, and their very next move sent a powerful message. They didn't pick some moderate, some kind of compromise figure. Nope. They appointed Mojtaba Khamenei, the slain leader's own son, who was known to be an absolute hardliner. The signal to the world was crystal clear. Iran's policies aren't just going to continue, they're probably going to get even tougher. So with their new leadership locked in, Iran played its biggest card. They moved to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that tiny narrow waterway that is, for all intents and purposes, the planet's most critical energy artery. And this one number explains so much of the panic we're seeing. According to military analysts, that single act took roughly a quarter, 1/4 of the world's entire oil supply completely off the market. Just gone, virtually overnight. And let's be clear, that decision wasn't just some regional problem. The economic shockwave from that move was felt immediately, in pretty much every household, on every single continent. You can see the impact right here. It was instant. Oil prices just shot up from around $90 a barrel to over $114. And that's not some abstract number on a screen. That's what you're paying at the pump. That's the cost to heat your home. And it's what it costs every business out there to ship, well, anything. And this is so much bigger than just the price of gas. That strait is a pipeline for so many other critical things. We're talking 35% of the world's fertilizer, essential petrochemicals, sulfur, which you absolutely need to make semiconductor chips, and huge amounts of liquefied natural gas. All of it is now stuck. No fertilizer? That means global food prices are going to soar. And that sulfur for the chips in our phones and computers? Yeah, your next upgrade could be seriously delayed or cost a whole lot more. This crisis, it really touches everything. You're starting to hear economists draw these really scary comparisons to the 1973 oil crisis. But many are warning there's a huge difference. Because this is a hard stop, not a voluntary production cut, the disruption could actually be far more severe. We're talking about something that could easily trigger a really deep global recession. So you've got the world economy on the brink, you've got a military conflict that's getting hotter by the day, and the big question on everyone's mind is, what on earth happens next? Right now, experts are gaming out a few pretty terrifying possibilities. Okay, so on one hand, you have some military analysts who see a real path to a strategic defeat for the U.S. Their argument is that Iran can just dig in for a long, grinding war of attrition, wearing down U.S. forces and political will until the cost is just too high and forces a withdrawal. But then you've got this other, arguably even worse scenario, the complete and total collapse of the Iranian state itself. We're talking about unimaginable chaos, a refugee crisis on a massive scale, and a power vacuum that could destabilize the whole region for decades. And then there's the third option, and this is the one that maybe feels the most likely right now. No clean victory for anyone, just a brutal, grinding, long-term war that doesn't really end. It just becomes the new, devastating reality that completely reshapes global trade and who our allies are for the foreseeable future. But here's the really sobering takeaway from all this. No matter which of these military scenarios plays out, analysts are saying one thing is already a fact. The era of predictable, easy global trade that we've all grown up with, it's over. As one commentator put it just this week, it's dead and it is not coming back in our lifetimes. And that all leaves us staring at a really fundamental and frankly frightening question. For the better part of a century, the world has operated under what's called Pax Americana, this period of relative stability backed by American power. If that era is really ending now, in the fires of this conflict, what comes next? What does that new world actually look like?